Distinguished participants, on behalf of the Climate Change Secretariat, the Capacity Building team, I would like to welcome you all to this third UNFCCC Capacity Building talk. Big thanks to all participants for your interest in attending this event. Special thanks to those who joined at difficult hours, including one of our panelists, or experienced connectivity challenges. We look forward to interesting and insightful discussions over the next 90 minutes. Before we start, just some brief housekeeping rules. To avoid disruption and background noises, kindly ensure that your microphone is muted and that your camera is switched off, unless you're given the floor by a moderator to make an intervention. Please note that by participating in this event, you consent to it being recorded. Today's event is the third in the UNFCCC Capacity Building Talk series, which seeks to facilitate discussion and the sharing of knowledge and information on actors and stakeholders involved in climate capacity building, including to see how to strengthen the focus of and this work on capacity building within the UNFCCC process. This series was launched during the virtual climate dialogues in November last year, with a very interesting first talk on the topic of monitoring and evaluating capacity building efforts. The second talk was held in May this year and focused on ownership of capacity building and the importance of attuning capacity building to developing countries' needs and priorities. For our talk today, the third one, we have chosen the topic enhancing access to capacity building. The capacity building framework for developing countries established under the Convention highlights the importance of promoting active participation of a wide range of stakeholders in climate capacity building, including governments at all levels, national, international organizations, civil society organizations, and the private sector. Capacity building activities should also take a whole of society approach and include marginalized actors and communities. Stakeholders involved in the UNFCCC process emphasize the importance of the fact that capacity building initiatives must reach beyond the public sector, which commonly is a key recipient of capacity building support. Reaching stakeholders at local level is pivotal to empower key actors and ensure local ownership and leadership, as well as retention of capacities. We believe that exploring how we can ensure better access among and across stakeholder groups and make capacity building more inclusive, vertically as well as horizontally, is timely and relevant to the global efforts to build capacities to address climate change and to support the implementation of the Paris Agreement, particularly Article 11, which relates to capacity building. Based on the above, this third capacity building talk aims to shed a light on what limits access to capacity building and how limitations can be overcome, to also provide insights and solutions for providers and recipients of capacity building on these matters. We hope that this webinar will directly contribute to the ongoing work on capacity building under the UNFCCC process through facilitating a discussion on a topic of key importance to parties and observers. To help us come to reach these insights on these topics, we have a diverse panel with climate capacity building experts representing various sectors and stakeholder groups. Their discussion will be led by our distinguished moderator, Mrs. Alejandra Lopez. Alejandra is currently the Finance and Capacity Building Advisor to ILAC, the Independent Alliance of Latin America and the Caribbean, which is a negotiating group under the UN climate change process. Alejandra worked for almost 10 years for the Mexican public sector, including as Director of International Affairs of the National Institute of Ecology and Climate Change. She also served as Director for Climate Change at the Mexican Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Deputy Director for Climate Change at the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources. In those capacities, Alejandra was also a negotiator on behalf of Mexico to the UNFCCC process between 2014 and 2015. As you can see, Alejandra is very well versed in the UNFCCC process, and she's also very knowledgeable on the capacity building aspects of the implementation of the Convention and the Paris Agreement. Before I give the floor to Alejandra and the rest of our panelists, we would like to begin this session with a short icebreaker using a tool called Mentimeter. After that short icebreaker, Alejandra will lead the panel discussion, which will take about 40 minutes. And then afterwards, there will be a 5-minute break and then a 30-minute moderated open plenary discussion. Lastly, we'll ask you to share your key takeaways via Menti, following which the event will be closed with some final remarks. Our team strives to design each capacity building talk as an interactive and participatory event with ample space for your engagement. Aside from the 2 Menti exercises I just mentioned, which will open and close the webinar, you're also invited to ask questions to the panel and also share your own views and perspectives on the topic of the event during the open plenary session. However, in order not to crowd the chat, we kindly ask you to reserve your questions for the panelists for the open plenary discussion after the break. Having said that, I would like now to hand over the floor to my colleague, Ellen, who will guide us through the icebreaker. Ellen, please.
Hello, everybody. Nice to see so many here. Now on the screen, you should be able to see the Menti link with a code so that you can log into the page and there you can provide the answers that we're looking for. I'm going to switch over to the slide in a second. I see that there's it should be 13337575, not 23. So 3 threes instead. But let's go and see the slide. So we're asking you, what does access to capacity building mean to you? So any word that comes to mind when you think about access to capacity building. So we see a couple of answers here: human resources, finance, technology, all important topics that can improve access to capacity building. Let's see if we get any more words that you associate with access, particular. Inclusiveness, also a good word. Skills, technology, again, finance, inclusive. Many words coming in. Opportunities, I think, is a good word as well. Trainings, improving skills. A lot of focus on finance still. Very important. Without finance, we can't really do any capacity building, maybe. Knowledge, also an important word. Dialogue, I think, also is key. Connection, inclusion. Networks, of course. I think these are all very good words to start our thinking around what access to capacity building can mean and what the discussions here today are gonna focus on. Improving resilience, also a very important word that just popped up, I think. But I think we can now hand over to, well, you can keep filling in with the words, of course, but we'll now turn to the panel discussion. So I'm gonna hand back the word to Alejandro, please.
Thank you, Ellen, and thanks to everyone that had contributed to the Menti. So it's, as Ellen mentioned, interesting concepts, interesting works that I'm sure a lot of them will come out through the discussions. So now it's time to start our panel discussion, and I'm pleased to give the floor to Alejandra. Alejandra, please.
Thank you, and good day, everyone. I'm really glad to be here and to be together these 2 other panelists that, as Alejandro said, my forte is in the work with the government in the last years, and it is really good to share this panel with people that has experience in the private sector and with grassroots organizations, so that we have a differentiated perspective, let's say, to the topic at hand. So let me introduce the panel. First, we have April Nishimura. She has deep expertise in capacity building with marginalized communities. April is the director of capacity building at RBC in Seattle, where she supports grassroots organizations led by people of color, immigrants, and refugees. She is also the lead author of Transformational Capacity Building, which I would love to read. It sounds like it's a very interesting report. And she's on the board of training resources for the environmental community and International Human Rights Organization, UUSC. April, welcome. And we also have Robert Tipman. He has worked for more than 20 years in the field of environmental finance and low carbon and climate resilient development. He's co-founder of Climatecos, a climate action project, and he's also a program developer and environmental finance solutions provider. He serves as chairman of the German Emissions Trading Association. So welcome, Robert, April, and with no further ado, we'll start the panel. So I would like to pose this first question, which relates to the issue of gaps and challenges. So from your experience working on climate-related capacity building,
Alejandra, sorry, I can just confirm that Hadika is joining us, so she's also here. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's okay because I haven't introduced her. So, okay, so we have our third panelist in the call. Welcome, Hadika. Sierra Hadika Hamshahid is a climate change policy specialist at the Ministry of Climate Change within the government of Pakistan. Welcome, Hadika, and we're glad that you made it. Great. So,
thank you so much.
So we'll start with the panel, and the first question is, from your experience working on climate-related capacity building, what are the key barriers and challenges with regards to accessing capacity building across different stakeholder groups? So I'll be thankful if you can focus on your experience working with nonprofit organization, private sector, and governments. So should I ask someone in particular to go first, or do we have any volunteers? Okay, so I'll ask. April, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thank you, everyone, so much. It's wonderful to get to be with all of you in whatever time zone that you're in. So my background is that I mainly have worked with marginalized communities, and there are definitely a number of barriers that they run into in terms of accessing capacity building. One of the first barriers almost immediately is that often they're not even aware what capacity building is, and the level of jargon makes it inaccessible. Often it involves either some sort of more bureaucratic process to access it through some burdensome application, or it can often be quite costly. So all of these immediately are barriers that prevent them from accessing it. But what I've also found is that for many marginalized communities, even once they're able to access capacity building, often it's not relevant and not as useful to them as it is to groups that are more dominant, because there still is a fair amount of colonialism and racism that is embedded in our capacity building practices. You know, even the concept that, you know, outsiders who are experts are going to come in and teach people things, on one hand can be useful, because obviously everyone can always learn new skills, including all of us. But often the best practices or the things that we think are the right way to do things can also force marginalized groups to assimilate to a standard or a culture that doesn't make as much sense for their communities. So if we're trying to think about how to build local ownership, I often find that you know, coming in with a stronger listening approach is very, very helpful, because often there is already a lot of skills within the community that are untapped. So I'll start with that and hand it to the other panelists, and hopefully we can have a good discussion about this.
Thank you very much, April. I think that's really thoughtful, and I think it doesn't stay in marginalized communities. I think that this idea that someone has a better experience and then they are going to share it tends to go to other levels. So, Hadika, would you please share your thoughts on this?
Thank you so much, and apologies for joining in a bit late. I completely agree with April, and as a practitioner myself working on this field, I can talk about from the point of view of Pakistan per se, and we, at the government level, there's more holistic way of dealing with it, and the major like the interventions related to Pakistan climate change adaptation and mitigation, which we are dealing with, is more for the capacity building under the umbrella of capacity building, is on the education through schools, university, as other education services provider, and also through trainings which include courses, seminars, and webinars. And currently, under the pandemic, e-learning is something which is emerging. Networking, I would say, is also something which is very important when it comes to capacity building. And these are like, and also specific coaching and these kind of things. So the major gaps, in my opinion, and I believe, is the lack of system thinking approach while we are dealing with the pressing issues of climate change. For example, like the issue of solid waste management or the floods or health are strongly related in cities, and experience challenges with drainages and poor solid waste management collection and outbreak of diseases. So to address these effectively require exchange of active coordination across different institutions. And this is very important, and it's very important that, for example, both public and private sector services providers or the city and public work departments work together. And the challenges, in my opinion, for working with government includes the lack of public awareness and support for climate action within the country, and also fragmentation of information, experts and research institutions, and lack of training in assessment approaches and methodologies. There is also lack of international support directed at building and retaining skills and organization at institutional capacity. And finally, I think there is also lack of strong policies, systems, and processes. New or existing bodies, both or entities, would use to efficiently and effectively plan and manage and contribute capacity building activities together with enabling environment necessary to meet national climate change goals, including education, as I mentioned before, trainings and all. So yeah, that's it from my side.
Thank you very much, Hadika, and thank you for that like really broad overview of these gaps and challenges, and it really speaks about how necessary it is to have a systemic transformation to what it is a systemic problem like climate change. Robert, please come in.
Okay, hello again, and yeah, thanks. Also, I'm very glad to have been invited to participate in this capacity building talk, and I was asked to share my views and opinion on based on my knowledge and working with the private sector in this context. So I would like to make 3 points. First, whom are we talking about? Who really needs it? Capacity building, if we talk about private sector. Second, barriers I see with regards to different languages, thinking differently, and a bit on requirements. What is really needed based on some recent surveys where we were involved with together with this UNFCCC secretariat. So the first point, who? I think the big corporates, they don't really need that. They basically know it all. They can buy the resources, hire, outsource, and all that. If we talk about such traditional capacity building, who then needs it really? So in our opinion, and what we see a lot going on there is small and medium, the SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises in the South, but not only in the South, also in the North. We see that also there's a lack of capacities also, for example, here in Europe. Barriers, speaking different languages or thinking differently. The language, technical language, climate expert language is different to business language. So there's different terminologies used, technicalities that are different to how the business sector looks at it. So they usually business people ask them, what does it mean for my business? Where are the opportunities? What do I need to do? Learn, invest in the short term. And there's some translation needed, some bringing different languages together. Another thing is also that what one needs to bring to the attention of the business community is you thinking in short-term, quarterly thinking is also something. If we talk about climate change, you need to change and help them with that long-term thinking. When you need to the green transformation that needs to happen. Requirements. There's 3 points I would like to make. If we think about how to reach out and what kind of initiatives also I've been involved, what we have seen at regional or national level, there's and I've been involved in that myself. Definitely, I think a role for bringing governments, private sector, civil society together for the UN, for United Nations organizations, international organizations who have experience, mandates, and acceptance in this regard, in particular at regional, international level. If we come to the local, national or local level, I have always seen it very useful to work together with associations, with the trade associations, because they know much more what's going on in the economic sectors. They are linked, connected to governments, lobbying. They can present and bring together their constituencies in the different sectors. And the last point I would like to make, based on what is really needed, what are the needs of the private sector, based on a survey we've done recently. As I mentioned, here we looked at the MENA region, but I know that in other surveys which were conducted by the UNFCCC secretariat together with experts, it's similar in the other regions. And again, I'll talk mostly about the SMEs. There are 3 things. First, what they need, or what came out of these surveys: reliable information and data on impacts and trends for decision-making and planning and related tools, training and information on tangible activities and resilient products, and 3, information on access to climate finance and technical support for implementation and measures. Well, I think I leave it at that for the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. And indeed, I think you're bringing one important issue to this conversation, which is the long-term perspective. And I think this goes to our last question, but I think it is important to keep this in mind when we think this is not something that it's just for today, for tomorrow, or the next years, but for the next decades. And we have to build these trajectories towards 2050 or to the end of the century that need to start now. And thank you also for talking about this work with the, let's say, not the usual suspects. So we have certain groups that we usually talk about climate change and capacity building for climate change, but the Paris Agreement, in a sense, is calling us to talk to everyone, and this goes to SMEs, to trade associations, as you were saying. I would like to challenge one thing that you said, because you said that big corporates have the knowledge and the finance to have their capacities being built or developed on climate change, but do they do it? Because I mean, in the end, it is the big corporates from fossil fuels to large car companies to some really large supply chains that are not making the necessary changes to actually have this transition to 1.5 degrees. So you don't have to come back now, but I think this is something that we need to talk about and to think about when we talk about the private sector and the challenges that there are for these large big corporates to actually do what they have to do. Okay, so we'll go to thank you for this. I think this gives us a complete picture of the different challenges and barriers within the governmental communities and private sector capacities for implementing the Paris Agreement. So now we'll move to the second question that we want to ask for this panel, and this goes to the other side of things on opportunities and good practices. So what, in your view and experience, are practical ways to enhance different stakeholder groups' access to capacity building and address the gaps and challenges we just discussed, including those that are structural and take into account local cultures, particularly of vulnerable and marginalized stakeholders and groups? So please do share your experience, including examples, good practices, tools, or any lessons that you have learned throughout your experience. We'll come back with the same order. So April, you have the floor.
Great, thank you. You know, I did want to quickly respond to something that Hadika shared about, I really appreciated your point of the systemic transformation. And these are not unrelated issues, because I just see with marginalized communities that sometimes it's a very deep distrust of government, which comes from, having been exploited or marginalized for many generations. So I see that as one other barrier I wanted to note in capacity building and what can hamper our ability to work together on this topic. But to address your next question about what has been useful, one of the most powerful things in our research, one of the most powerful things that we found was actually supporting peer-to-peer learning. So, I mentioned earlier kind of this dynamic of having experts and people that are learners, but an organization that I work with, UUSC, supports Indigenous people that are at risk of climate displacement. And so they've supported convenings of Indigenous people from Canada, from the US, from the Pacific Islands to meet together and share learning. So even though they're coming from very different cultures and very different climate challenges, they've been able to learn quite a lot from each other. And in our research, we've found that peer-to-peer learning is often the most useful aspect of capacity building. I'll highlight one other example. It's not climate related, but there's an organization, it's a little bit older now, but Slum Dwellers International, which organized in the Philippines and organized in India with slum dwellers in order to be able to purchase land and have micro plots. But the folks in the Philippines were able to visit India. So slum dwellers were able to save enough money and organize to work with these other communities, and it was so inspiring for them, because then they were actually able to believe that this is possible, because they were seeing other slum dwellers who had accomplished it. So that is just such a transformational way to do capacity building that is quite different from often what we see. The other things I'll quickly note is actually supporting marginalized communities and leaders to be specialists instead of generalists. We don't necessarily need to go in and teach and HR and all these other technical expertise. Actually, often it's more effective to aggregate those needs and provide those through some kind of fiscal sponsorship or some sort of aggregated means, so that people can focus on the programmatic work that they're really good at, or focus on engaging their community, which is really their expertise. And also making sure that we are attending to leadership. So, like, how many Greta Thunbergs are there that we have not tapped into, because they're coming from communities that don't have access to those kinds of platforms or the support to spend that much time in their organizing. And then lastly, I'll just say, continuing to make sure that our interventions are culturally relevant, and that we're providing capacity building in many different layers. So, maybe not just technical assistance, but also money for employment for people to be utilizing these skills, or leadership coaching, and investing in the development of leaders of different communities, especially when they're marginalized.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I think that this is really important. Not only the supporting traditional knowledge, but when you share circumstances, it's easier to communicate how to do things or how to improve anything. And I think that's even true when you speak the same language. It is so easy to live in this world where we have to speak in English because that's the common language, but that's like definitely not the common language everywhere. So in my experience, coming from Spanish speaking country, we find this brotherhood with all Latin American countries because we speak the same language. Even if we have some specific differences, it's easier to simply talk about challenges, opportunities, because you understand each other, and that goes to what you're saying. I think that's fundamental, and take account the needs of whoever are doing the work. I think that cultural relevance, it's absolutely necessary. Thank you, April. Harika, can you come in?
Yeah, okay. Thank you. And I think April has mentioned really good points, and further adding to them, I believe that more consistent and working with institution like Ministry of Climate Change, I believe that a more consistent and institutional architecture is very it's necessary, and to guide and facilitate implementation, and more importantly to avoid duplication and fragmentation of efforts. There's need to transform the capacity building efforts as well, but especially when it comes to funding of capacity building, to allow for a more long-term sustainable country-driven approaches which are accountable, and as mentioned by Robert as well, for the long-term approaches. And we need more reliable assessment of procedures and metrics to evaluate progress on capacity building. Oftentimes we see that there are many capacity building workshops and everything, but what came out of that is something which we never talk about, and which is never evaluated after that. So I think that's very important to have a good system and reliable assessment of that as well. And both research and analysis of capacity building at the international level, for instance, to define common principles and priorities, and drive lessons from the experience of different countries, as you have also mentioned, coming from a Spanish-speaking country, and but at the national level as well, for instance, to define national priorities and principles, and tackle the difficult challenge of building subnational and local capacity in a sustainable manner is very important. Every community have their own challenges and norms and things which are okay, and which are not which is fine to do in a different community, but not in a different country. So we need to have indigenous methodologies for capacity building as well. So the main area I think which can be focused on is the most important, I would say, is human resource capacity. Imparting specific skills to individual is the fundamental purpose of the capacity building, in my opinion. And especially in the climate context, these skills could range from energy auditing, for example, or installing solar installation panels, and to project design and implementation, or most importantly, the strategical decision making is very important. So many of these skills can be developed through training programs, and although they are more complex, the skills, the more important the training is, because as as the burden of decisions and developing certain kind of things increase, you need more training. Again, coming to the first point of institutional capacity is very important. Institutions are necessary to organize human and other resources and achieve specific tasks, and ranging from simple, as mentioned before as well, energy audits to complex technology development and deploying those activities across several sectors or innovation needs training and capacity building. It's very important to have networks, great interaction between actors, and especially within the South at all scales, local, national, and regional, I would say, will promote knowledge and experience sharing and synergies between entities and across application domains. And while we meet, we learn a lot about different countries as well, cross-country experiences as well. And this happens when you network, when you meet and we talk. Metrics, as I mentioned before as well, we need to have well-developed and well-applied metrics to measure capacity. Will serve as an essential tool to the progress and to serve as an analytical base to understand the patterns and the determinants of successful capacity building, and follow that. And things which are not very useful and not giving you good outcome can be avoided. Such metrics can be essential to measure progress under the global stock take, for example, amended by Article 14 of Paris Agreement. So these are the things which we can have, which we can consider. And coming to what April said, it's very, I think this is a very good point you made, April, on the community capacity building. So it's very important to have more community-oriented approaches, and agencies and communities can build, cycles of contracts, and the people begin to express and act on their concern. They meet with other stakeholders and community sectors. Cooperate when they align, when the issues are aligning, when they're moving in the same direction. So the gradually emotional and thinking also become more constructive and strategical, and public agencies find it easy to listen and act on community concerns, and building trust between staff and the local participants. There are certain interventions, in my opinion, can address capacity gaps with regard to climate change specifically. They can be on-job trainings to public and private sector personnel working in environment protection and other areas which relate to climate change and access, such as disaster risk management, health, WASH, etc. What I see in Pakistan is the disconnect between different sectors, and they believe that every issue should be looked in silos, and it's hard to explain that these are all collective issues. They are cross-cutting, and we have to look at each development issue from the lens of climate change. It cannot be dealt in silos. We have to have a more collective and whole of government approach. So this, I think, on-the-job training is very important. Translation of climate change information in local languages. Mostly we have materials on climate change. We have materials on certain kind of skills, but the local people are not able to get benefit out of that because they don't understand. And to meet the demand of masses, you need to have translated into the local languages. And increasing youth participation, I would say, is also something coming from a very young country where 68% of the population is youth. So this will also lead to media transactions, and we need to build capacity of the youth of the community, and also offering climate change education at schools, universities, and universities and in the vocational level is very important. Other issues which comes to my mind is there are various behavior change strategies that can be considered from a systematic perspective of mitigating impacts of climate change. So behavior change communication or BCCC communication strategies, which is designed to encourage individuals and communities to change their behavior and adapt to healthier and beneficial and positive practices, can be used when it comes to, for example, sustainable development, the behavior of particularly Pakistan citizens require a major behavior change. And for example, hygiene, solid waste management, sanitation should be one of the highest priorities of the individual. And yet this is not the case in the population of Pakistan, but this is something which can be introduced in order to encounter that strict behavior change in communication is required. There are some interventions which I mentioned before as well. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Hedeka. That was a whole lot of things that you say. So I will not attempt to summarize it. But thank you for bringing different perspectives to this conversation in relation to the monitoring and evaluation. So not just leaving things there, the institutionalization, and again this holistic view of things, this systematic view of capacities and of climate change, and importance of training and networks. And I hope that you all are part of the Pccv network, which I think is in the end one of the main ideas of providing these peer-to-peer, these exchanges between different people everywhere in the world. Robert, you have the floor.
Thank you. I don't know when we should come back, discuss your comment on the corporates, but maybe we do that at a later stage. I definitely have also response to that, but I would make another 3 points here in this regard. First, one on when I look at the regions, because I'm in this for the last 20 years, and I was a bit worried, but I'm slightly more hopeful. For example, we compare Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and when I think back about the times on the Kyoto Protocol, for example, the mitigation business, we saw that Latin America, Asia were leading a bit, and Africa left behind. And we work also a lot again these days again in Africa. I'm slightly more hopeful that this is not going to happen. Also, the donors seem to have that on their radar. We are involved, and I see international, the GCF, the Europeans. It's in front of their doorsteps. A lot of things, not only climate change, migration, security issues coming together. The Germans, the French, there's a lot of funding being provided, and I also see that the private sector collaboration, and I'll come back to that later when we think about supply chains, there are things happening. The second point, when we think about what do you need to do to implement capacity building, I'm slightly less worried, or, well, let's put it that way. If we think about, I would call it the software, the coaching, the experts, trainings, these kind of things, to implement that. Also maybe think about costs or money you need to take in your hands. More about, if you think about, I call it maybe the hardware. If you setting up or upgrading infrastructures, demonstrations in research and actual applications to be used as showcases, and as well as scaling up at the same time, data mining, data centers, mitigation, adaptation, action sites to showcase, demonstrate at the national, local level. On the other hand, I mean, what are we talking about when we consider all the sums of money that still go, let's say, into the wrong direction? And one last point I would like to make is with regards to, I think it's a little bit in the same direction what the first panelist was saying. There seems to be a bit of preference with regards to capacity building, what is expected, outputs, outcomes. You see already this language, results-based management, things like that, where we favor northern attitudes and perceptions in the way things should be done, implemented, and what comes out of it. And I think one should slightly shift the perception a bit and look also from a local southern point of view in ways how we can develop capacities, drawing on indigenous, local developed knowledge and practices and values. We actually, as Climaticos, we are also involved in things where South-South exchange between Latin America and Africa, for example. next to the conventional old school north-south, which still has its values and will happen, bringing money, expertise, technologies. But I think that's something I would like to highlight, that one should look at a bit of different new perspective, also having learned from the past. And then also, again, looking at SMEs, how can collaborations, for example, business to business with corporates, northern corporates, in the context, for example, and I'll come back to that when we talk about good practice and new entry points, supply chains, for example. I believe there's also a lot where the business sector, business to business, can work hands-on training or learning on the job, can build capacity at the same time implement, bearing in mind that we do not have much time left. I think I'll leave it at that here for the time being.
Thank you, Robert. And indeed, I think the whole South-South cooperation is absolutely necessary, and it's part of what we were saying before, because we do speak the same language, because we do have usually the same circumstances, same vulnerabilities, and so it's easier to work over that. Although there will always be the need to have investments and finance coming from developed countries to enable this cooperation and technologies and projects. So I guess we can move to the last question, and then you can come back to the comment I made. And anyone is welcome to do that, because I think in the end, the implementation of the Paris Agreement requires really thorough changes in our development models from the different perspectives, governmental, private sector, at the community level. So how would enhance more inclusive access to capacity building contribute to more transformational climate action at the scale and pace that is necessary to transition to a 1.5 degrees world? So it's not only, let's say, that we need to have these peer-to-peer exchanges and South-South collaboration, but do we have the time to do that? Because we really need to have this transformational action now and throughout this decade to actually enable this trajectory to 1.5. April.
Yeah, I love the points that Robert and Hadika are bringing up, because marginalized communities are actually often so motivated to work on this issue because they are the ones who are facing the brunt of the impact and have the least ability to adapt, within their communities. So I think that by changing our capacity building, we hopefully will be able to actually unlock the potential and creativity of so many communities that have been locked out of these processes. Because what we really need, what Hadika said is definitely right. We need to look at every development issue from the lens of climate change, and we really actually need to be supporting our civil society to be building movements for climate change that can be putting pressure on government, can be putting pressure on, businesses and corporate in order to demand the changes that they want. Because, the problem that we're facing is not really just a technical problem or a structural problem. It really is a human problem, in the sense that we have created this and perpetuated it with very little care for our survival or the survival of the planet. So we need to do capacity building in a different way, because we actually need to fundamentally transform our relationship to exploitation and the way that we relate to each other. And, when you look at a lot of indigenous communities, actually, they have a lot of deep wisdom about how to do this. So we have to let go of this thought of that there's, technical expertise flowing one way, and realize that actually there's a lot of deep learning that we need to do for many of these communities that have been locked out of these processes. And if we're able to give them more center stage and to share tools, it could help to transform our ability to actually address this, because we really will need everyone. So I'll leave it at that so the other panelists have time to share.
Thanks, April. Hadika? Hadika, can you hear us?
I think she dropped out. She might be rejoining, so maybe.
Okay, so Robert, if you can come in and then we'll come back to Hedika afterwards.
Sure, no problem. 3 points from my end here. One is I wanted to, as we were also asked to share experiences or from work we are doing. So it's coming back again to this study or studies that have been done together with the secretariat, briefly highlighting what a kind of strategic cornerstones came out there with regards to private sector. Second point on supply chains, and the third is incubation. The first, what came out of the and we as Climaticos, we helped with the for the MENA region, but I believe what we came up with as recommendations, it hasn't been implemented yet, but it's based on my experience from working on this for more than 2 decades now. The similar approaches will be useful in the other regions. It was first, you need a mix of capacity building and assistance to bring theory into action, by bringing together academia, research organizations, and associations from different economic sectors. Second, and that was also mentioned just before by one of the others or from you actually, lobbying for right legal regulatory frameworks and economic incentives based on sound, profound knowledge and new skills developed. And that also includes, in particular, when we think about, it was mentioned now several times, we have not much time left. And in particular, certainly the North has much higher responsibility, but we should also bring on the carbon pricing side, the South into the game, because we need everybody that we can get to get it done within this decade. So that comment on the side, certainly not forgetting about adaptation, resilience, supply and value chains. Third, using existing platforms, initiatives, and mechanisms to build on and integrate that. We don't need anything new. It's all there. We can work with what they have. Fourth, climate clubs or coalitions or consortia at the regional, national, and local or sector level to lead by example, champions in the regions to be identified, countries and related organizations, and showcases for others to follow suit. Last point on that, the UN and international organizations, including those from the private sector, such as the Carbon Disclosure Project or others, should come in and help to moderate, facilitate, and mediate, in particular on the regional or also the national levels. So my second point, supply chains is something and value chains becoming more and more important, cross-border with regards to minimizing environmental footprints, greenhouse gas mitigation, and co-benefits. For example, we are currently engaged with the German Development Ministry designing an initiative, deforestation-free supply chains. And that goes cross-border, north-south, where you bring, for example, the agro-food industry. That's on the one hand mitigation, on the other hand minimizing economic losses in the supply chain. And they really also, the bigger corporates start looking at this and get worried, and so they will need to work on that and can certainly need their supply partners from the south. The last point I would like to, it's one sentence still on that, and I think there's also a great potential for capacity building on the job, so to say. Last point, again, when we think about the SMEs, also something that came out of work that we did recently in Africa under the Great Green Wall, where some may know that the Green Climate Fund is and other donors, there's a lot of money, funding will flow. We've been involved in that. And when we talked to experts there, looked at the local levels in the different countries, incubations to help, and there again, North can help South, but maybe also South-South, incubators to work with, help startups, SMEs and then that there's a local, local level capacity building, and then, so to say, if you want to say, unleash the power of SMEs there at that level. So I think incubation is also something next to supply chains, which I think has a lot of power and value. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. Alejandro, can you confirm to me if Harika is back?
I don't think she's back. We don't see her, so maybe she's trying to reconnect. So, but
Okay. Okay, so this comes to the end of the panel, and I would like to keep three thoughts of what we've heard so far. One is Hanika's, in terms of that we really need to see this in a systematic way. So every development issue has to be done with the lens of climate change, or by the lens of climate change. And a second thing is what Robert just said now about we can use existing platforms. We know what to do. We have the technology to do it. We really don't need anything new. What we need to do is to unlock the potential to multiply, replicate efforts to actually get us to where we need to do. And this goes to capacity and to technology and finance. I'll give you back the floor, Alejandro. I think this would be the closing of the first part of the talk.
thank you very much, Alejandro, and thank you, Robert, April, and Halika, for this very insightful discussion. I'm sure we're all now curious to hear from our audience their questions to you, as maybe additional reflections from the panelists.
So now we will start the open plenary session. And if you have questions to our panelists, please indicate it either in the chat or just let me know from the floor, or post your question. We can have you can raise your hand, put it in the chat, or just open your microphone and ask questions for the next 15 minutes.
Yeah, can you hear me? My name is Zinat.
Zinat, yes,
Okay,
we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm working with the very remote community in Bangladesh who are living in the river Iceland, basically. And they are deprived from every sort of service and facilities. And when I tell about service and facilities, you mean they have like from government or other sector, they have nothing. They are not having any sort of facilities. So when I went to that communities and the challenges I faced, that there are some knowledge they already have, but they don't know these are the indigenous knowledge, and this knowledge can be integrated to the mainstream. For example, people who are very people who are flood affected, they are using some sort of technique like portable oven, then other stuffs for the to deal with the flood and other things. So what I feel that there is a very less, they are not they do not they don't act as a community, they don't act as a unity. For instance, if someone house is breaking due to the river erosion, they don't if they come as a community and help each other, their stress and their risk can be reduced. So when I go and talk with them, and from my organization friendship, we are working over there. So there was a first of we faced the challenge to bring them in a one under one umbrella. So and tell them the knowledge you are having, these are the indigenous knowledge, and this can be integrated to mainstream, and this can be helpful. But now we are working a long time for with that communities, and we see that their mentality is changing. But at the very first, make them understand and work with them, it was a bit challenge for us.
Sinet, thank you very much for sharing that specific experience and the challenges that you are facing. It seems to me that April could complement and I wouldn't say just respond to your comment, but come back and offer some of her experience with grassroots communities and organizations. On this, April.
Yeah, thank you so much, Zinat, for the work that you're doing and sharing that experience with us. Yeah, I do often find that within communities, they're undervaluing the knowledge that they do have. And, you know, in my experience working with Indigenous people in the Philippines that were very under-resourced, I was also really noticing the effect that climate change was actually also impacting their ability to maintain their cultural knowledge. So, you know, people that were practicing certain art forms, you know, the most recent typhoon had destroyed their looms, had destroyed their kilns. So it was, you know, climate change was also having this impact on their ability to regenerate their culture through generations. So I think it's a cyclical relationship that definitely deserves more attention, both because there's so much that we can be learning from these communities, and also because climate change is actually impacting often their ability to transmit that knowledge to the next generation. But you know, I'm glad that you brought up this specific example also, because it really is such a good example of what it's like to work with a community that has very, very little resources and really no support from the government. And we have to recognize that many of the communities that are going to be, and actually already are, deeply impacted by climate change are also those ones that have very really little relationship to the government and little support. And it will take time to build trust, and for communities to start to trust that the government might actually be able to provide something helpful, and the governments need to step up and actually start providing helpful mitigation and adaptation and resources to these communities, because they're really on the front lines and they are showing us what the future may look like for many other communities.
Alejandra, I think there's a question in the chat. Let me read it out. It's from Paul, and I guess it's directed to the panelists. Do you have some specific examples of a program or initiative increasing access to capacity building with regards to climate change?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for reading that question. So Robert or April, perhaps you would like to speak more specifically to the programs, projects you work on, to see this, how this works in accessing capacity building. Perhaps Robert, you can go first.
Sure. Well, traditionally, and not to a surprise, this is the job of the United Nations organizations, the usual suspects like the UNDP, UNEP, and the other ones. So they should actually, it's happening, has happened all the time. One specific where I know where a lot of things happen because we are involved there is where this is also happening. Is what I said before, under the Great Green Wall, where a lot of different agencies, Green Climate Fund, the bilaterals, the French, the UNFCCC, others coming in and also providing then and funding an awful lot of, in particular for communities, rural communities, providing capacity building services, funding, to work with local experts and organizations, NGOs, and so on. So I'm sure there will be a long list of what is in the pipeline already ongoing.
Thank you, Robert. April?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit more to some of the work that UUSC has been doing, which is an international human rights organization, but does focus on those who are affected by climate displacement, and particularly Indigenous people. So they've done a lot of great organizing with grassroots organizations to actually create policies that then can be brought to government. So, you know, making policy recommendations about increasing funding, making government institutions more equitable and accessible, especially to frontline communities, and also actually relying on human rights governance frameworks, and asking for those to be implemented more broadly, especially by the US, but particularly in relation to climate change and how it's impacting communities. The other example, which I mentioned previously, was supporting that peer-to-peer learning of Indigenous communities, and that has been a really effective way to do capacity building, because the fruits of that work are not just for that time when they're together. The goal is to build long-term relationships so they can continue to be in community and continue to share solutions that they may be developing or lessons that they learned about things to avoid. So again, it's like, how do we center movement building in our capacity building? Because workshops are helpful, but they're short-lived, and what we actually need to create are networks and movements that can be much more powerful and much more long-term than even just the life of our capacity building intervention.
Great, thank you. And talking about networks, I wonder, and also that we have another question from Zainab Mohammed from Sudan. He's asking, do you have plans for capacity building of ACE because they do achieve objectives of UNFCCC and Paris Agreement? So I wonder, Alejandro, if you can come just with a short comment on the one hand on what the Pccv network is, so perhaps people in the call don't know it, and if you have any information on the link between ACE and the Pccv.
Thank you very much, Alejandra. Yes, and thank you for that question. Well, to start, one of the focus of the work of the Pccv and the network thematically this year has been on youth and capacity building, which is of course very much related to the work of ACE. And we have had a lot of engagement with youth representatives that are also very much engaged with the ACE process under the UNFCCC. We also have, and as Alejandra mentioned, the Pccv, the Paris Committee on Capacity Building, has established what they call the Pccv Network, which is basically a voluntary association of organizations interested or working in capacity building. As it stands, we now have, or the network has 270 members from different organizations, from grassroots organizations, from academia, UN agencies, civil society. And a lot of these organizations are also very closely linked to ACE, and maybe my colleagues from my team can put further information on the Pccv network in the chat. Also wanted to mention that, of course, during the COP26 in Glasgow, there will be certainly many events related to ACE, but also the Pccv, the Committee on Capacity Building, will have the Capacity Building Hub, which will be running for six days. And again, a lot of requests have been received for events that have a close relationship with ACE from the youth perspective, but also from the other elements of the ACE context. I have to say that the linkages are very, very strong with ACE, and we're trying to, or the Pccv is trying to make it even more practical, and also in the using as a vehicle the Pccv network, but also, for example, outreach channels like the Capacity Building Hub. So if you want to say enough, if you want more information, there my colleague really has just posted some the links to the Pccv network webpage, and there you will find information about the network, and also it will lead you to information about the Capacity Building Hub. So maybe I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Alejandra.
Thank you, Alejandro. So I guess we don't have any further questions, and we are good in timing. So I'll give the floor back to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Alejandra and colleagues, for this great discussion. This is we're closing the final part of this capacity building talk. In this section, we would like to know from the audience, also using again this tool Menti, what are your key takeaways from the discussion? Well, from the audience and also the panelists, I mean, you can also bring your perspective and the key takeaways. So Ellen, could you guide us through how this will work? I guess it's the same code, the same process, but please go ahead.
Yes, hello, exactly. It's the same code. So you just go to Menti, type in 13337575, and you will hopefully see, wait, in a minute you'll see the page. Can you all see the page now? So what we're asking you is to sort of type in just one sentence or two sentences. What are your key takeaways from today's sessions? What do you think was the most interesting part, or something new, or something that you really are going to take with you from the discussions today? So we see, yeah, importance of peer-to-peer learning, very important, of course. Systemic change, we talked a lot about systemic change and the structural solutions. Someone has gained new insights, that is always positive. Also the importance of applying a stronger listening approach and system thinking. So we see a lot of comments about the systemic approach that we talked about in the plenary, in the panel discussion. The role of incubators, very interesting as well. And of course, traditional knowledge, unlocking existing potential, and local and indigenous knowledge. You can also see unlocking the full potential of existing technologies and platform systemic approaches, peer-to-peer learning. Importance of peer-to-peer learning across stakeholders who share similar circumstances. So yeah, a lot of different, yeah, we have one new ownership and buy-in, also a very interesting takeaway from today. Networks, fundamental changes requires capacity building at various levels. So again, talking about the fundamental and the sort of systemic challenges, which is kind of then maybe the overarching sort of theme that we all might remember from this session. Please keep filling in this page, but I will hand back the word to Alejandro now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ellen. I mean, we still have some time. I don't know if maybe just some quick one-sentence key takeaway from our panelist and Alejandra. Maybe just to hear also your key takeaways. So maybe starting with April.
Oh, it's hard to summarize in one sentence, but yes, I think emphasizing that we actually must collaborate between these different sectors. So it's been wonderful to get to be alongside all of you and learn from you, but we have to also start thinking about how marginalized communities, how the private sector, and how government can actually have more collaborative spaces to support each other.
Great, thank you, April. Robert, your key takeaway.
Well, I'll take the opportunity to respond, to get back to the beginning and respond to one challenge from Alejandra, where I think we are on the role of the big corporates, no? and where they do not really need capacity. Of course, they need capacity building, but what is more important, I think we're on the same page there, is a question of willingness at their end, and they have been dragging, and at the same time, politicians pushing them, politicians being pushed, and creating the framework, regulatory, legal framework, and the incentives. That's what the big corporates in Europe or in the US or elsewhere, the corporate carbon disclosure, ESG, CSR, it's all there, but it's really about that willingness and pushing them. And one last comment, maybe what we have seen here in Europe or in Germany, we had just elections, and some of you may know that climate change, unfortunately, I think a decade too late, but finally was the most important among the top 2 or 3 topics for which parties got most votes in the elections. And that was also related for the youth going out on the street together with scientists and really make politicians move and bring it up high on the agenda. And that also, there's also a lot of corporate CEOs, younger ones, who also say, yes, we need to move, we are willing, but the government obviously need to put the frameworks in place and give us the incentives. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you for addressing the question from Alejandra. Really appreciate it. Alejandra, your reflections.
Thank you, and thank you, Robert. And I agree. I think we are in the same page. So I learned a lot about many of the things that are happening on the ground for capacity building, and I love that because sometimes you are like too into the negotiations that you lose touch with what's going on grassroots. So that was really refreshing. But I keep thinking that. Indeed, we already have a lot going on, but the scale and pace that is necessary to where we need to be is not there yet. So for me, the sense that I get from this is we need to unlock this potential, but we have to continue putting pressure in governments and in the largest corporations to actually do what they have to do if we really want to keep this transition to 1.5 alive.
Thank you very much, Alejandra. And thank you everyone for sharing your key takeaways and your final reflections. There's a comment in the chat about also the importance of academia and civil society. So very well noted. Well, we hope the discussion today provided useful impulses to related discussions in the process, UNFCCC process, including the discussions, conversations on capacity building. We also hope the findings from the discussions here can fit into the work of the PCCB. The PCCB, as I already mentioned, is currently preparing for its third capacity building hub, which will take place at COP26, during which many of the issues that we have talked about today will certainly be discussed again in greater detail. We hope to see many of you there, either virtually or in person, to continue the discussions. We also hope to see you at the next capacity building talk, which will be held during the first quarter of 2022. A summary report of today's event will be shared with all participants as soon as possible. We will also post a link to the recording of today's event on the Capacity Building Talks website very soon. We encourage you all to share your views on today's event and or the link to the recording via your social media accounts with the hashtag UNFCCC. With this, the only thing left for me to say is to thank you again all very much on behalf of the UNFCCC Capacity Building team for joining us today, and to kindly ask you to complete post-event survey. It will only take a couple of minutes, but for us it's really, really important if you could take the time to complete the survey. Please click on the survey link that is posted now in the chat, and we hope to see many of you at our third capacity building talk, and some of you also at Glasgow, hopefully. You will receive relevant information on the next event in due course. So having said that, this concludes this third capacity building talk, and I wish you a very nice evening or continuation of your day. Thank you very much.